Welcome to the Money Insights Podcast, where high income earners come to learn wealth building strategies that will take them from high income to high net worth. With your hosts, financial and wealth building experts, Christian Allen and Rod Zabriskie.
Welcome into today's episode of the Money Insights Podcast, where we talk all things money and business. My name's Christian Allen, and I am here with my co-host, Rodney the Pod Zabriskie. Rod, what's going on, man?
Hey, I'm doing great. How are you?
I could not be any better than I am today.
Wow.
That's how good I am.
Wow. This is great.
Rod, the sun's shining. It's like 78 degrees. Can I just talk about something fun I've been doing recently with the weather being good? Okay, yep. So I thought it would be fun. My kids are getting a little bit older to where they can they can just do more. But specifically, what I did is I bought motor scooters.
Okay.
Not like sit. Oh, well, gosh, I'm trying to think of the best way to put this. So they're just the ride on scooters that go like 15, 20 miles an hour type of thing, right? Mm-hmm. But my son struggles a little bit in the scooter department. So he has a go-kart.
Oh,
and
cool.
We together are a little bit of a biker gang. And so last night around 10:30, we headed down the street to the Maverick, and we pulled up there, and I'm telling you, we were getting all sorts of looks. But here's the thing, Rod. I was so excited that at 10:30 at night, we could go out scooting.
That's awesome.
Go-karting.
Yeah.
And it was just perfect weather. So anyway, I think I'm really good just because the sun's shining and the weather's good, and it just doesn't feel like it's been that way for a while. So
yeah. Okay.
We'll
watch for the scooter gang.
Yeah, watch. I don't know if we're going to make it all the way up to Payson. It would probably take us, taking a pit stop and making sure we plugged in,
recharge
a few hours before we could get all the way down to where you're at. But I'll let you know if we're heading that way.
Awesome.
Okay. So today, Rod, we're going to hit on a question that we've been getting. Oh, before I do that, hold on. Before I do that, I want to make sure we hit on important announcements. So we've been very excited, Rod, about the Facebook group growing, right? We've over the last month or so, we've probably doubled the size of the Facebook group. So it's been really fantastic from that standpoint. My announcement or my reminder is just, if you haven't joined it, make sure that you do. It's investment strategies for high income earners. We're going to make sure that we up our game on the content. We do put out the Facebook Live every Tuesday. We try to be super consistent with that. But we have other things going on throughout the week, and we love it when people join in, ask questions, and we build together through the community. So
absolutely.
That's that. Okay. Now, with that said, Rod, we've gotten a question recently, particularly after the virtual summit that happened a couple weeks ago. Mm-hmm. The question, Rod, and maybe it was a little bit of a surprise. So one of the members of our lineup is Adam Carroll. Mm-hmm. Adam Carroll is the creator of kind of a unique debt reduction strategy, the SHRED method.
Yes.
We'll go into we'll take a couple minutes to talk about what it is here in just a minute. But one of the things that's interesting, I think people have been wondering, like, how does that work inside of the Money Insights philosophy and methodology, where we 100% value leverage, aka debt, to build wealth. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. But here's the deal. The catalyst for this show was a few emails of people basically saying, how do the investment optimizer and the SHRED method cohesively work together to make our lives better, right?
Yes.
So that's what we're going to take on today.
I'm excited. I'm ready.
Okay. I'm excited too. Okay. With that said, Rod, my first question is this, and I'm just going to ask it to you.
Okay.
Because this is the question some people are asking us. Isn't the SHRED method a debt reduction strategy? So I'm just asking you that as a question. Let's just pretend I'm a client and I'm like, wait a minute. Isn't it a debt reduction strategy? That's not really what you guys do. I mean, is it any different than like the snowball method?
Okay. All good questions.
That's where we're starting.
And the answer is yes, it is.
Yes, it is better.
A debt reduction strategy.
Oh, yes, it is. Okay, it's a debt. Thank you. Moving on.
Yeah. All right. So, but to put it into context, because like you said, then the follow-up question is, well, that seems counterintuitive to the whole thing with conservative leverage and using it to make more wealth build more wealth than I can if I'm just doing everything without using leverage. So here's the way I would clarify that, and have been clarifying it with people, is it's similar. So if you go to the investment optimizer, we put money into the policy, we take a loan against the cash value to go out and invest, right? And then we take the cash flow from the investment and we pay that money back to pay down the loan, right? So in that sense, I'm using cash flows from my investment to reduce my debt, right? If we use that same terminology.
Interesting.
However,
it's a good point.
Am I reducing that debt because I don't want the debt? No, it's because I want to have an efficient flow of cash moving in and out of my investments and my opportunity fund. So I'm reducing the debt, but I'm always trying to be really clear when I explain this to people, that when I'm doing that, I'm, in air quotes, I'm replenishing my opportunity fund, because I'm going to take another loan and go out and invest in something else. Okay. So it's yes, it's a debt reduction strategy, but if you adhere to the kind of principles we talk about using conservative leverage in your world to build your wealth, then it's debt reduction for the purpose of going out and using it again, tapping into the debt again to go out and do something else really cool.
So what you're saying, Rod, is what I'm hearing is that you may as well do it in the interim, right?
Yeah.
So if my opportunity fund is going to have some downtime, let's be as efficient as we possibly can with that money. And that's what's happening inside of the investment optimizer, right?
Yep.
We're using those things and the same thing basically is applying to the shred method. And we're going to get into the details on that.
So if I were to reword the question, I would say, well, yes, it's a debt reduction strategy, but the way I would think of it more so is an interest saving method. I want to use the debt, but if I can pay less interest on the debt, why wouldn't I want to do that? That's what the shred method is helping me do.
Yeah, it's kind of like a cash flow system, right?
Yep.
Okay. I think that's helpful. So I think that sets the stage well. So like I said, oftentimes people ask us this question, don't we generally encourage people to utilize debt? The answer is that we still 100% believe that leverage is, if not the key, one of the maybe 2 or 3 most important keys to building wealth effectively. However, that doesn't mean that we want to just pay interest for the heck of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So again, if there's opportunities that don't change the way that I invest to go and knock a layer of interest off of, out of what I would have paid otherwise, again, we might as well do it.
Yep.
And of course, by doing that over time, it creates significant value, just like in the investment optimizer, which is kind of creating this arbitrage over time, which when we look back ends up creating significant value.
Absolutely. Yep.
Okay.
Agreed.
Okay, Rod. So with that said, I want to make sure that we have a baseline on the couple of things that we're hitting on. So I feel like we've talked about the investment optimizer and enough that we don't even need to go to an overview. If you haven't heard about it, then check out one of our episodes about the investment optimizer. We've got several of them. However, we only have, maybe one other episode specifically related to the shred method.
Mm-hmm.
So what I was thinking might be helpful is just to take a minute and do a quick overview of kind of what the shred method is, based on your understanding. Again, realizing we're not the creator of the shred method.
Yeah.
So I should give that disclaimer. We believe that we have a sound understanding of the different elements of it and how they work in conjunction with the investment optimizer. However, we're not the Adam Carroll. So we're going to do our best to be Adam Carroll for today. But if it ends up that we mess it up, Rod, the good news is we can just go grab him and bring him on.
That's right.
So, okay. Yeah. Sorry for that. Here's the deal. We need to know from you, Rod, what is the shred method and how does it work?
Okay.
Generally speaking.
So the shred method is, like we talked about, it's a cash flow system. People are still buying the same homes, cars, investment properties, etc., and using debt to do it. But what the shred method does is it creates a a flow of money moving kind of through your system to pay as little interest as possible on the debt. Okay. So maybe using an example would be a good way to kind of explain it. Let's just say that we're working with someone who makes $500,000 a year. So let's just use round numbers. That's $40,000 a month. And after paying taxes and insurance or whatever, then maybe their take home is $30,000 a month. Okay. And let's say that their regular monthly expenses is about $10,000 of that. That covers the mortgage, that pays for the car loans, food, all the other things that they do in their world. And again, I'm purposefully using really round numbers just to make it simple. So $10,000 a month for that. And then the other $20,000 a month they're using to go out and invest. Okay.
Can I just tell you that's some impressive ratios. If you get people who are doing that, you're going to be on a good track.
Yeah. And what's cool is we see these people
We see them
regularly.
all the time.
Yep.
Yeah.
Their income goes up. Their expenses go up as well, but not proportionally. Right.
Because the opportunity to invest becomes more significant and the ratios go down over time. Right. So like I talked about, it might be difficult to have a 50-50 ratio like that in terms of how much money you've got allocated toward investing versus expenses and taxes. But as you continue to build your investments up, those start to create income and those ratios become easier to obtain. So anyway, like I said, that would be a good ratio, but it is something we see all the time. Okay, keep going.
Okay. So the 20,000 they're setting aside for investments, they're putting that into the investment optimizer, and they will continue to do that. Okay, so we're good there. The other 10,000 that they're using for their regular expenses, what that's going to do is, before I get there, one thing that they're going to do is go take out a HELOC on their home. It could be a HELOC on an investment property or something else that they have, but what they're going to do is essentially the way that Adam describes it, I've seen him describe it, is we're creating a pool of liquidity. Okay. So obviously we have some liquidity in maybe a bank account, emergency fund type of stuff, or business reserves, or even inside of the investment optimizer, right? To the extent that I'm not tapping into that creates liquidity that I can access when and if needed. Well, another element to this liquidity is I go and take a HELOC on my home. Now, to be really clear, when I take a HELOC, I haven't necessarily used any of that for debt. Okay.
Okay. And that is important because I think like naturally, Rod, I do this when I hear someone say, oh, you're going to get a HELOC for, let's say it's for $100,000. I naturally think, okay, now there's $100,000 out on loan that I'm paying interest on. Right. But there is a very big difference between having the HELOC available to you and actually using it. So
that's right.
Thanks for clarifying.
Okay. And what that does is it adds to your pool of liquidity, because in your example, now I have $100,000 of additional access to capital if and when I need it. I just tap into the HELOC to do that, and I can access that liquidity. Okay.
Makes sense.
It's net equity I have in my home anyway. In this case, when you take out the HELOC, you're just creating liquidity out of that net equity
you're just
in your home,
making it available.
Right. Yep.
Okay.
So now I have this pool of liquidity. What am I going to do with it? I'm going to, and so I have the pool of liquidity and I have that 10,000 a month coming in that I'm using for my expenses. Well, what I can do, and again, I'm purposefully oversimplifying this to not get
we need
too
a starting
using, but to clarify here, what Adam has created is a software that helps you make the moves that I'm going to describe here in a minute. Because it'll specifically say, well, you've input your numbers, your goals, and then it spits out and says, well, move money and do this and do that. Okay. So what I'm going to describe again is overly simplified, but there's a software that helps you do this.
Okay. So what you're saying though, Rod, I think this is important, is we're going to talk about the general principles, and you would have to have a belief in the philosophy, but you don't necessarily have to know every intricacy, because the software will literally tell you what to do and when to do it.
Yes, that's exactly right. Yep. So again, I mentioned this person has a mortgage payment they're paying. So obviously they still have a mortgage on their home, a car payment, they have debt on a car. Let's say they have some credit card debt or some other kind of consumer debt in addition to that. So similar to the snowball method, you want to attack the higher interest rate debt first. So let's say you had, whatever, 10 grand of debt in a credit card that's charging you 18% or whatever. Well, you would take out of the HELOC and 10 grand to go pay off that credit card, right? And to your earlier point, if you do that, now you have 10,000 of debt on your HELOC and you have to make a payment on that. However, you also have this 10,000 a month of income coming in, right? So again, I'm oversimplifying it, but you take the 10,000 and you put that towards your HELOC. Instead of dumping it in your checking account, instead you put it towards your HELOC. Now, for the moment, you have no more debt.
Traded in that moment, you've traded debt from the high interest rate credit card to the lower interest rate, although it's gotten higher, but to the HELOC,
7 or 8% probably.
Right? So now I'm trading it to the HELOC, which is still a win in that situation. May not be if my car loan's at 2%. We'll talk about that in a minute. But then, okay, take me down the next step.
Yeah. So now I have the $10,000 of debt on the HELOC where I'm paying. Let's just say it's 7%. But when I get that 10,000 of income for that month, I'm going to dump it towards my HELOC.
Yes. Okay.
Which to some people seems kind of weird. Like we're used to dumping it in the checking account. That's where I'm going to spend from, right? That's where I'm creating that's the liquidity usually that a lot of us use as we're moving money in and then going out and paying our bills and doing things. Just realize I can do the same thing with my HELOC. That represents liquidity. I put the 10,000 towards that. I paid it to zero for the moment, but then in 10 days, I'm going to have to pay my mortgage. So I take whatever the $3,000 that I need to use to go pay the mortgage. And then my car payment comes due. So I take the $800 and I go and make my car payment. So over the course of the month, I'm tapping back into the HELOC to cover those expenses. But what I've done is instead of having a month worth of 7%, again, 1/12 of 7, because the 7 is annualized. But instead of just taking on that interest and having to make that payment at the end of the month, I'm paying much less interest because of the way I flowed my cash.
Okay, that makes sense. And when you put it that way, right, you're literally just creating moments in time where you're not paying. You have these vehicles that have interest that require you to pay interest on them. But by flowing it in this way, you're basically creating a situation where you're minimizing the time in which you're having to pay those other interest rates. And of course, the idea here is to do that without materially disrupting the way that you flow your money in general.
Yeah. And going back to the earlier question of, well, is this a debt reduction strategy? For some people, that's what they want. I'm sure there are a lot of people that Adam works with who say, well, I don't want to have a loan on my home, right?
Yeah.
So they use this strategy and instead of paying it off in 30 years, he talks about situations where they're paying off in 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, great point.
Right.
That's not really us.
We're not necessarily saying that. Like, again, if that's what you want to do, but I'll also say this, to the extent that you do pay down your mortgage, which we're all doing naturally anyway, even on that 30-year cycle, to the extent that you do pay that down, you just increase your HELOC. You just created more liquidity. That pool of liquidity gets a little deeper. And for what purpose? Oh, well, now you can free up more dollars to go out and invest with, or to go play with, or whatever, like whatever your priorities are, that you've freed up more money to do that.
And from a pure money standpoint, from a pure like interest rate standpoint, the chances are that with any amount of due diligence, you can find investment opportunities that will certainly outperform the amount of interest that you're paying on whatever your mortgage is. So anyway, again, if you understand how it works, and so for me, Rod, if I'm being honest, when I hear this, the one thing that comes to my mind is like, is it going to be a pain to like implement these different things?
Yeah.
And that's probably like the biggest hiccup. And obviously this is not our expertise, but that's where we would say, if you work with like Adam and his team, actually have the software, I don't know what it is, $100 a month or something like that. might even be less than that. But anyway, then you'll be able to actually get those moves, and it makes it a lot easier.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure that he's even said that the software is set up so that it can send you a text or something.
Yeah, so
like when that time of the month comes to move money from here and do that with it, then you get that message and you just do it.
So. Okay, Rod, there's okay, let's move on. There's a couple of examples that I want to hit on specifically that relate to me, and I feel like they're going to be that other people listening to this are going to be related. It will relate to them as well. Okay, but we'll get to that in a minute. So here's the question. What are the primary similarities and synergies between the two strategies? We've talked about a lot of these, but let's just hit on them one by one. We've got 6 things listed out here. The first one, which we've been hitting on, is the money movement efficiency, right? And when we say efficiency, we're really saying flowing money and paying the least amount of interest possible, right?
Right. Yep. And in the investment optimizer, people may be familiar with kind of this conversation we talked about where it's the same money that's going to go into the same investments. We're just using an opportunity fund that gives us a lot more benefits along the way, right? So instead of a bank account, by putting it into this specially designed life insurance policy, we're getting the 5+% return, tax-free, additional efficiencies, the arbitrage, etc. So it's just much better. You get much more value over time by having flowed your money through that system than otherwise. And so the same thing we're saying on the shred method side. Money, efficiency, you just end up in a much better place by doing
Every time I hear you describe the investment optimizer, I'm like, man, I need to do even more of that. It's just so good, right? Like any cash sitting there. Like, here's the thing. I say this kind of tongue in cheek, but I'm not even kidding. Like, we don't even talk about or emphasize probably 5 really great benefits to the way that to what that strategy is, right? Yeah. We're not talking about the ancillary benefits like the death benefit, like the long-term care benefit. Like, we're really talking about how to improve a return, but it just does so much more than that at the same time.
That's true.
Anyway, okay, sorry. Okay, first one is money movement efficiency. Both of them certainly are utilizing the efficiency of money movement to improve, especially over time, what you're able to do from a wealth building standpoint. Okay, the second one is both of them, Rod, follow a defined set of rules. Maybe talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, with the investment optimizer, kind of the way I just described it, I'm taking the money in this very broad example that I used, the $20,000 a month that person's taking in and putting into their or setting aside for their investments, they're putting into the investment optimizer. They build up that fund, they find something they want to invest in, they take a loan against that cash value to go make the investment. It kicks off cash flow, they flow that back. So there's a very set pattern that we're using, this set of rules to create that efficiency of cash flow that we talked about a minute ago. Well, the same thing's happening on the shred method.
And the interesting thing, Rod, we're going to talk about this in a second, is that we can actually use both tools to make one another just a little bit better. Okay, so hopefully we've made this pretty clear, Rod, but leverage is still an important key to building wealth, despite the fact that the shred method is in a lot of ways a debt reduction methodology, right? Yeah. But we've talked about that. I feel like we've hit on that enough. I just want to emphasize that really both of them in different ways are actually utilizing leverage, right? And leverage in a lot of ways. We're leveraging different tools, but there's financial leverage that's happening inside of that flow as well, which of course gives us the opportunity to pay less interest than what we're earning.
Yeah. And think of it this way. On the investment optimizer side, we're enhancing it, creating additional growth. On the shred method side, we're paying less cost, paying less interest. But as Benjamin Franklin famously said, a penny saved is a penny earned, right? So to the extent that I'm saving that interest, that's the same or the equivalent of creating more interest, more growth on the investment optimizer side.
Good Ben Franklin reference, Rod. Okay, arbitrage is our next one. And again, this is kind of the same thing. It goes hand in hand with leverage, but we're utilizing this combination of arbitrage. And again, that happens because of the movement of the way that money, and
Mhm.
really in both situations, that's what's happening because of the flow of money, because of the tools that we're using. And one of them we're using a HELOC, and one of them we're using life insurance, but both of them are utilizing arbitrage to create this long-term value proposition.
Absolutely.
Kara, talk to us a little bit about number 5, which is they both give us an opportunity to pay less simple interest while earning compound interest.
Yeah. So people, I'm sure they've heard us talk about that on the investment optimizer side. That's one of the really cool benefits that we create in the flow, because the money that we have in our bucket in the cash value life insurance policies remains there untouched and just continues to grow and compound while we're accessing the money through the general account of the insurance company. And again, we understand I'm paying interest on that loan, but as I flow that money off of my investment, I'm putting it back in there. I'm paying that interest as I go. Keeps the interest simple, keeps it from compounding on me. So I pay simple interest on the one side while I'm earning compounding interest in my account. Well, think about what I just said just a minute ago in terms of what the shred method is doing is it's making it so I pay less interest.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm paying simple interest, but I'm paying even less of it while the compounding interest is growing. And this is now true when we combine both of them. It's true in my policy, it continues to grow, but now it's also true on my home, right? I'm tapping into it. I'm using that home equity line of credit, but because of the flow in the meantime, and I'm paying less interest as I go. But again, my home is going to appreciate the same either way.
Okay, Rod, you started to combine the two in that response. So we're just going to dive into this combination of how the two are working together hand in hand. Okay, so here's the question. Does it make sense to use the investment optimizer as the shred account? Why or why not?
Okay, so I would think of it as the kind of like the spillover account. In other words, and you've made this point, many times, a life insurance policy in this sense is not a great place to be flowing money in and out on like a daily basis.
Yes, if speed's important to you, then life insurance is not the place, right? Like we can get money in and out within, 5 days to a week. But it's not going to happen, hour by hour or just day to day. Like it's just not designed to do that.
Yeah. Now, if you had a cash value line of credit with the bank, and that's what you were accessing while using the policy cash value as collateral, then you could get quicker movement there. So then it might be more practical in that sense. However, a HELOC, especially if the HELOC is with the same bank where you do your banking anyway, your check comes in, you move it very seamlessly from your checking account to your HELOC. And then when you're ready to pay the mortgage, you move that much back and you pay the mortgage, etc. Then that makes it much simpler as the kind of that flow of funds going in and out. But then, like we talked about earlier, you're saving on interest. What are you going to do with those savings? You're paying down the debt. Are you okay just having less debt, or do you want to tap into it more? As you have, like, let's say you pay down a good chunk of your mortgage. Let's just say you're even using the shred method towards your mortgage. So now you've increased your HELOC as a result, right? Every time you pay it down, you increase the HELOC, or you can, you can refi your loan. And so that I mentioned that, let's say it was a $3,000 mortgage payment previously. Well, you've paid that down, you refi the mortgage, and so now it's only an $800 a month payment. Well, what are you going to do with the extra savings? That's extra that's going in towards your investments, which goes towards your investment optimizer, right?
So it's all coming full circle,
right?
Okay, Rod, is there anything else you want to hit on? I have one just kind of scenario that I want to throw out there that kind of applies to me, probably applies to us, and probably will apply to a lot of other people out there right now. Is there anything else from like a combining the two that we want to hit on before I hit on this next piece?
Maybe one last thing.
Okay.
And that is one of the like hidden gems of the investment optimizers that you mentioned earlier is the idea that I have an emergency fund, right? And most people just keep that in their bank account. Well, for the same reason that I want my investment opportunity fund in a place where I can actually earn money that's tax-free, why wouldn't I also want that for my emergency fund? Right. So we talked about this pool of liquidity, the emergency fund being one of those. Well, we and a lot of our clients will also use the investment optimizer policy for that emergency fund. Now, you always do want to keep an amount of cash closer at hand, in your bank account that you can get more quickly if needed. But I'll give you an example. One of our clients has the investment optimizer policy, uses it for his investing, but he won't ever draw it down below. His number is 180,000. He needs to keep 180,000 of liquidity in the policy. So when he takes his loans, he's just always careful to not tap into it below that, because again, now it's also acting as his emergency fund / in his case, like business reserves.
Okay, Rod. So you're preemptively hitting on my question or thought here. And that is this. With investment opportunities more difficult to come by than they have been over the last decade, specifically if you've been like in the multifamily space and you've been a syndicate, if you've been investing in syndications and you've just been getting one out and then rolling into another one, well, there's not as many things to roll into, right? Which means there's more money sitting on the sideline. So I have quite a bit of cash, Rod, and my question is this. Is it one of those situations where if we have cash that's just sitting there, right? Maybe, again, and I think I know the answer to this already, but doesn't it make sense to do exactly what we're talking about? Like, isn't that a prime example? If you're sitting there and you're like, I've got a few $100,000, like maybe it's not in the investment optimizer. Oh, okay, Rod, here's kind of let me put it out there like in an example, or we'll formulate an actual situation. Okay. So let's just say I use the investment optimizer. I'm putting a couple $100,000 a year into it. And I make, $800,000 a year. And the investment optimizer is a big part of my investment component, right? In addition to that, I likely have money sitting at the bank and other places, right? And so the question then becomes like, if I have liquid money sitting there, regardless really of whether it's in the investment optimizer or whether it's just sitting in cash, doesn't it make sense to attempt at least to do both of these things?
Yeah.
That's not always easy, right? Like
Sure.
It may not be practical to say every dollar is going to run through these things, but from a pure efficiency standpoint, like it would be really valuable, especially with money that's just sitting there anyway.
Yeah. It's a good question. And it also brings up kind of in the past when people would say, hey, I'm paying extra toward my mortgage, I would always think, oh man, why would you do that? Right? Why would you lock that money up? Essentially was my problem with it. Right? Because you pay down your mortgage, which means but their whole plan on that is I want to pay off my mortgage sooner. Right?
Yeah.
That's kind of the whole reason why people do that. But then in my mind, I was thinking, but you're locking that money up. Like it's tied up in your home now. You no longer have access to it. And sadly, I would meet up with people who were paying a lot of extra money toward their mortgage, but they didn't have much of an emergency fund or a lot of liquidity elsewhere. And it's like, man, why would you do that?
Dangerous.
Yeah. What the shred method allows you to do is use cash. So now getting back to your question, you have this cash sitting there. You wish you were doing something with it, but you just don't have those opportunities right now. Well, you could use that to pay down your debt, which could even include your home. Again, it is debt reduction, but the point is you do that and then you go get your HELOC, or if you already have the HELOC, you increase the limit on the HELOC because you've now created additional equity in your home. So you haven't given up the liquidity. right? You haven't locked that money up like I always just figured it was, because now you can access it and then use it when you're ready for it, when that time comes and you're ready to use it. But in the meantime, you just use it in this flow, like Adam's, like the software shows, to pay less interest on the debt that you do have.
Okay, so Rod, I think you answered my next question, which is, are there any drawbacks? And the primary drawback is really losing liquidity. But if we have a plan to avoid that, so what you're saying is it does make sense. It is more effective to the extent that I also maintain that liquidity. And the way to do that is to increase the HELOC along the way.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, Rod.
Increase the HELOC,
it.
And increase the investment optimizer.
And yes,
right?
both. Right?
That's something
grow
that,
together.
Yeah, that's something that we see regularly with our clients, and even with us. You set up your policy, but there's a maximum amount of money you can get into it each year.
Right.
So
we need
someone
to
will
figure out how
say,
to simulate the combination of them together, creating the additional layer of profitability that the investment optimizer is building, and the minimizing of the interest that you're paying, that we'd be paying otherwise. Whew, it's powerful stuff.
We've talked to Adam about trying to do something like that, having a software that shows both.
That would be really cool. I was just thinking we just make like a simple like example,
a diagram.
But you're right. You're right. It would be even cooler if we could create something that simulates and allows people to like tap into it, just like he's doing with the shred. Okay, Rod. So I think I've asked all the questions I have. Why don't you finish off by giving us kind of final thoughts? What's the consensus on this?
I mean, I think the consensus is that the investment optimizer makes sense to use in conjunction with your investing. I think the shred method makes sense to use in conjunction with your debt. And then when you are using them side by side, it's like you're maximizing the efficiency on the growth side and on the debt, like interest payment side. And it's just brilliant. I think that's the consensus.
Okay, thanks everybody for hanging out with us, and we will see you next week.
Thank you for listening to the Money Insights podcast. To learn more about the financial and business strategies discussed in this show, please visit moneyinsights.net. The views and opinions expressed on the Money Insights podcast are not intended to be individual financial, tax, or legal advice. Always consult with the appropriate advisor before making financial decisions. And if you're enjoying the show, please feel free to rate, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. This will help others find the show and learn wealth-building strategies for themselves. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll catch you in the next episode.